pages, marketing this
Remember
fabric
the yellow
collection.
pages, young? Y'all know what the yellow pages is.
So that's how, and I learned about marketing and business.
Wow.
I learned about how a product was made because they were a manufacturer. And I was painting the original drawings for the designs. We would send them. Okay, we were not manufacturing in Africa, we were manufacturing in India. So we would send the paintings to India. And sometimes I would get the paintings back, and I have them in my collection. By the way, they're at the Smithsonian now. They're part of the collection. But that's another story. But the thing is, I learned about how a product was made from the start, how it was marketed, and how it was distributed. And that was in repeat. That job ended. I got another job at a rug manufacturer, and I was the first in-house designer this company hired. And I learned about how rugs were manufactured, how they were distributed, and I was the one who was developing all the concepts. Wow. And I was very bold back then because I stayed there for a year, because again, I went through a breakup, right? And I was like, you know what? I need to do something for myself. I had this desire to go travel. I was always traveling, and I said, you know, I want to take a 3-month trip to Asia. So I went to Southeast Asia by myself on a backpack trip. And I told the company, I said, I'm done. And they were like, okay, no problem. And so I went to Asia for 3 months. I had the best time.
Where did you go?
I started in Hong Kong, Philippines, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, and India. That order. Wow. I took the plane, I took the train, and the bus through the different countries, right? This was through Cathay Pacific. It was called the All Asia Pass. It was $1,000, and you could pick as many cities from the 13 cities that they were.
I know.
Remember that? When they did that?
Do they still have this pass?
Yeah.
Do they?
You remember that
I don't
part
think
when they
so.
had that
I was
offer?
gonna say, if they do, I need
2000. This was in 2000.
2000. Lord.
Yeah,
And
and you know, it was the best time. I had 7
We
outfits.
had jobs, right?
7 outfits in a backpack. $30 a day
7
budget.
outfits in the backpack.
$30 budget. I mean, $30 a day budget. That includes my housing and my food. And you know, it was the best time. But coming back, this is the key part. When I returned back to the U.S., I had moved back home to Connecticut because, you know, I was like, I had given up my apartment. And I said, Mommy, you know, I need to come home for a bit. She's like, all right. We all had a turn, by the way. After college, we all had a turn. So I went back, but I said, you know what? I'm not looking for a full-time job anymore. I'm only going to be working freelance because I wanted to train myself to not be reliant on the corporate 9-to-5. And that's when I realized I went back to that same rug company and I said, hey, I'm back. They're like, oh, we have a project. I said, but I only work freelance. They're like, okay. But that freelance turned to 5 years. And then I would always find work freelance doing different jobs, started licensing my work. You know, I got into I learned about the concept of multiple streams of income because one will dry up, one will be steady, you know. And my mother was like, all right, time for you to go. You need to go buy a property. You see, Mommy was like, you don't rent, you go buy. That freaked me out. I said, Mommy, I ain't got no money. Not for this time. You buy what you could afford. So I found what I could afford. And that's how I got my first condo.
Wow. Just wow. Okay, so we're gonna fast forward now to because I know the entrepreneurial and the travel is connected to this publication.
Yes.
So take us to how far before the reality of the idea was, the seed was planted, and then how you created. I'm gonna steal your book because it's right there.
Yeah.
Piccolo was like, I know this book. I am coming and I'll be in the front row and I need this book
I need
signed.
this book signed.
Like, I bought this book like months ago. So, talk to us.
So fast forward, you know, I spent many years designing, and I started my own business, Malene Custom Carpets, in 2009, designing for residential, commercial, and hospitality environments. 2017, I said, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm burnt out. I have a much stronger creative voice than designing for the interior designers. So I discovered a new medium, clay. Started taking classes, found a residency, and I was hooked. and I like to study and learn in community. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go apply for grad school. And by the way, this is the second time that I didn't get in, then I applied again, and I got 5 offers. So I was very determined.
So all those who don't think if you don't get in the first time, you shouldn't try again.
That's right.
Keep trying.
So got into grad school. Now it's 2020, and we all know what happens in 2020. Wasn't even sure if school's gonna open, but they did. I went to Tyler School of Art and Architecture in Philadelphia. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna take these 2 years to focus on learning about my heritage through a Caribbean diaspora lens. I had yet to have that opportunity, and I wanted to unravel, like I say, this romantic relationship I had with the Caribbean and really understand, like, how did it form? You know, what did it mean to be a part of the Black diaspora? My father's from Jamaica, my mother's from St. Vincent, first and last islands to be colonized. What does that mean, right? And so I intentionally enrolled in one of the only Caribbean art history classes that was offered that semester, and it was called Colonial Visual Systems. And it was talking about how we learned about the Caribbean through the imagery, right, through the art. I was the only MFA student in a group of PhD art historians. And so I was coming from a different perspective. I was listening to my classmates talk about art from their way, and it was hard to understand a lot of it, and I was like, well, where's the artist voice? So every time I would interject in conversations, I'm coming from the artist perspective. Yeah. And it was a great learning experience for all of us. And then I got an email from the publisher in September, asking, Malene, would you be interested in writing a book? Now, mind you, the publisher knew about me because I'm in one of their best-selling books. It was about women entrepreneurs. So they had a sense of who I was. And of course I said yes. But I knew I didn't want to write a book about like design or home design because I was really entrenched in like this whole interiors, and I had tried that before. I wanted to do something for the community, and also the book that I wish I had while I was doing my research and studies, because I was interested in being in conversation with makers who are also thinking about the Caribbean from this lens, and I couldn't find the written information in a collective space where artists, makers were talking about their work, not the finished work. Because I could find plenty of books around the finished work through catalogs, through exhibitions from curators, from historians. So that was the yes.
Who was the first artist?
Well, the first artist that
said yes.
Oh, well, I'll tell you this, right? Okay. So I made this list, right? I started, people I knew, right? A lot of people I didn't know, right? And I sent emails in bunches, like in batches, right? I think it's funny. I think it was Karen Olivier who was the first, yes, but then Karen didn't have the time later, which was fine. But the first interview was Terry Body. So that was my first interview.
Tell us about Terry.
It was interesting because, Terry's a photo lens-based multidisciplinary artist, an educator, and, he's exploring memory and cultural identity. And my editor and I, when we came up with the questions for each maker, we had created this themes around their practice, and we call it Threads of Kinship, which is in the book. And so each maker had to fill out a questionnaire, like based on the themes, and then what we did was we formed those questions to the maker. And after I had that interview with Terry, he was like, "Oh, these are some really good questions." And again, the first person, you don't know how they're going to react, but then it confirmed. I called my editor. I said, "Jennifer, it was a good interview," and she was like, "Oh, we were just so excited because you just never know how each person was going to react." And once they started to see that the questions were really specific around their practice, they felt like, oh, like she's really interested in what I do, and how I'm interpreting and what I'm thinking. And they saw the care that I put into the work.
So this is a question that I won't lie is because of seeing the presentation you did with NYU, which then made me think I went back to the book and looked at it in a very different way, which was the color palette and your your design, your hand in every part, outside of your giving the artist space for their voice. Just visually, if you don't already have this book, it's just beautiful. And to know that you were so specific in the choices. Are you guys, is this flipping while we go?
Kinda is.
Yeah, sort of keep rotating, because I think one of the slides will show that, but talk to us about the design.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm a maker of many disciplines and mediums. I'm very interested in creating beautiful objects, and I wanted this to be a beautiful object. I had created sketches for the publisher around just the visual of what I wanted. I knew I wanted like really bold portraits, full page bleeds. I wanted you to feel like you were truly inside their practice without literally being there. Now, how do you do that? It's through imagery. It's through the color palette. I work with my book designer, a longtime friend and collaborator, and so she knew me and she understood the importance of this project, and she said to me, I remember when we started thinking about just color, as you mentioned, she was like, Malene, send me images from during your time in Jamaica. Like, just send me some pictures. And I sent her a bunch of images, and that's how we created the color palette. She started to pull the colors from it. And then she was intentional about presenting fonts that really represented the culture. Like, when you look at the names, that font is called Afro-Knot. It was inspired by characters from Senegal, Mauritania, and then the main font throughout the book is from an Afro-Brazilian typographer called Macaroni Lima, and that font was called Obia. And so,
I love that.
and so, you wouldn't know these things just by looking at the book, right? And then the other intentional part around design is that we organize the makers by first name, alphabetically by first name, so we wouldn't put any more emphasis on our colonial last names. And by doing that, we had no duplicates.
Wow.
We had no duplicates, because other way we did, because there were like 3 Clarks in the book. And then if you look at even just the way the name is written, the first name is very large and the last name doesn't have as much power. So if you think you know somebody in the book, don't look by their last name, because you ain't gonna find it that way. And then the other part is that when going through the book, each portrait is really different. It really speaks to the maker, and we're on Katrina's right now. If you go back a slide to Katrina's portrait, Katrina's work is about nurturing and about motherhood. And I wanted something that really felt like you were being nurtured by her work. This was the last image that we made on the photo shoot, and I remember the photographer, Alaric Campbell is his name, my main photographer, and I said, Alaric, no, we gotta do something that like really like envelopes like Katrina in her work, like we gotta wrap her in her work. And he's like, all right, and he got on the ladder, and that was the image. I was like, that's it. Now, that's not a typical artist maker portrait. And that was the intention, because I also wanted them to see themselves too in a different way versus, the typical, white background, white box studio portrait, where there's nothing wrong with it, but that wasn't this type of book.
Stunning.
And then another design detail is the end papers. So when you open the book, there was a question that I asked each maker who they dedicate their practice to. We didn't have room in their interviews to include it, so we decided, you know what, we're gonna save it for the end papers. And so basically, when you look, you'll see the maker's name, and then you'll see like a series of names or a statement. And grandparents were very central to many of the makers' practices. Grandmothers are like top notch, like they're just such a pivotal person in many of the people's practice. So you'll see, it'll say, my name, and I say, I dedicate mine to all Black women. And and it's on the front and the back. So that's what the end papers are saying there. And then I see Althea McNish, who's on the screen right now. I also left space for two ancestors who didn't get the recognition while they were alive, but they also have a place in the book. And then Dr. Christine Chinsika, one of the curators at the V&A Museum, she wrote that essay about Althea McNish's life. She was a Trinidadian textile designer.
You don't know her, you should. Amazing.
Yeah.
I will, which some of you will be surprised, because normally we're like, no questions, because we're afraid of soliloquies. So let me warn you,
Don't worry,
I
I'll
will be
stop you.
unforgiving about chopping off the Shakespearean in you. But we will take a few questions. I know, it always happens.
I know. I love questions, so.
Yes, not soliloquies.
Oh, and the last design details.
No, but I was gonna let you have your final word if you want to say anything else about the book, but also talk to about what your hope is for it, and also maybe what's next for you. What are you working on next?
Well, I really hope that curators, makers, all type of people who are collectors, it doesn't matter, who are interested in the region itself, to start looking at it from this contemporary creative lens, to not think about the Caribbean as this paradise space that we just go and relax, that there is really a lot of talent and opportunity for the makers to not just exhibit and to be collected, but to even think about how you're crafting kinship with your own family, with the region, with the land, the people. I want people to use it as a resource. You know, there are many people that are in there you may know, you may not. I've shared it with historians, collectors, curators, and they're telling me that, you know, I didn't know many of the makers in there, and it's also inspiring them to think about their practice in a different way. I hope that people do connect with the people in the book too, and it's one of these books where you don't have to start from the beginning. You could just open one every day and be inspired and read a conversation, take a deeper dive, do more research, and spread the love about the book. That's what I really want, you know. I hope people feel seen. I really want us as a Caribbean community to feel seen in this lens around contemporary art, because one curator, a historian, said to me, he says, you know, Malene, this is like a missing part of the contemporary art conversation. And so I don't want it to feel like it's a separate thing. I just want us to expand on, you know, Black diaspora experiences. Whether we're in Canada, the US, it's all part of the diaspora, right? And so it's important that we have something like this. And this is just the beginning of a conversation. This is one book. It's just the beginning. I hope to produce more, but what I'm working on now in the studio is developing more ceramic-focused installations around my research. And then I will be continuing my research in the Caribbean, focusing on the pottery history, really specific around the African Caribbean traditions of pottery, because I think of our pottery as our tool for liberation. And I want to be able to document that in multiple forms: film, images, and book form. So that's me.
Time for the books to sell out. Yes, I said it. The books to sell out. But we'll take a couple questions, maybe 2 or 3. I was gonna go to Pixel first, but you put your hand up first.
Was it difficult finding enough people to fill this book?
I'll tell you, it wasn't difficult to find enough people because there was plenty. The difficulty was in budget. It's budget. You know, I want you to understand that I worked with 13 different photographers, so I had to hire photographers to make all the images, and I couldn't afford to have them travel to all the different locations. And photography, if you don't know, when making a book, it's one of the most expensive parts of it. And I didn't want to use existing photography, because I could have, and because there are plenty of books where makers could have sent me their portrait and they could have sent me images, but I didn't want that because I had a very specific creative direction on it. I think the challenge was about editing. It wasn't about finding, it was more about editing. I don't know who question.
Go ahead.
Hi, I was just wondering how you feel about Patricia Fay's book on Creole. Do you know your?
Yeah, I met. She's Heidi. You're talking about Patricia Fay's book Creole Clay. I actually met Patricia last year at NCECA, which is the National Ceramic Conference, And I was presenting my research on my trip in Jamaica. And I used her book as part of my research and cited it in my research papers. I think it's a book about the ceramic traditions in the Caribbean, and I think it's a great starter. But I just think there's room for more, because the problem is it's one of like 2 books that are really focusing on that region, and I just want to see more.
But it's also, well, I saw Patricia present her book a couple of years ago, I guess. It's also from a white Western lens of someone whose family was rich enough to travel the Caribbean, and that's how she came to,
Yep, exactly.
So,
Yeah. And she's also she's a professor, right? So it's academic in a way. You know, this book, one of the things I do pride myself on, it's very accessible. I'm a visual learner, and I wanted something that was very visual for many to enter. But Patricia's book it's a good starter. But for me, I do want to have something from the Black lens, and I know that that's missing, and so that's why I'm eager to like build on that conversation.
One more?
Well, we got 2, 3. Come on, we got looking.
The artist is always on like laissez-faire, and then I'm like, okay, there's 3 of you I saw put up your hands.
So we gotta get them tree,
Okay.
all right? Go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, so question for you is, what was the superpower that your art brought out of you versus, like, when you're creating your art, what are the superpowers that it brings out of you versus when you were working on the book? What superpowers did that bring out of you?
I think the superpower is the community builder part. It was the building community part. I realized that I made the assumption too that many of the makers knew each other. And I realized that they didn't. They knew of each other, okay? And when I was in Miami on the book tour, there were quite a few makers who were in the book who came to the talk, and OMG, how they reacted to each other. It was like a New Year's celebration, you know? Everybody was signing each other's book. And it was just like, wow. They were like, oh, we didn't know about, you know, it wasn't about like me making some fabulous like ceramic object or even the book. I think it was the community, the part that you can't really touch. You know, that became my superpower. If that makes sense.
I think at the back.
Okay, first of all, thank you for creating this. As a lover of crafts, thank you very much for putting this together. Question. Earlier you mentioned when you were in school that you weren't allowed to, create Black skin tone.
Yes.
What do you feel that restriction came from? Like, why do you think that?
Well, I was in a very small white town. It was a white teacher. All my classmates were white. And racism is part of the DNA of the America. So we're talking, that was the 80s. You know, I'm a 72 baby, okay? So this is early 80s, imagine. There was not, we didn't talk about Black art or making or anything Black at this level. Granted, we had our civil rights and, Black liberation was still at the height, but I was surrounded by white people. And I could tell you stories. I played softball. I was a very athletic student. And I remember I was the only Black child on the softball team. The coach could not pronounce my name. So guess what they did? They decided to call me Molly.
Oh, hell no.
So when my Jamaican father found out, he went on that softball field, confronted the coach. He says, "You will not call my daughter Molly. Her name is Malene." And ever since then, of course, they changed. But you got to understand the environment. As a child, you don't know. And my mother, it's not that she didn't. She wasn't all about Black culture, because my father was too. But again, she's trying to raise 3 children on her own, and you got to pick your battles.
Yeah.
But leave it to the Jamaicans. No.
Been a cure.
Oh no. I want to recording. I would love to have been there, fly on the wall for that, shutting that down. Shut it down.
Oh gosh, as an 8-year-old, you kind of feel embarrassed too, because you're like, oh, what did I do? But you know, when you look at it, I didn't do anything. And I accepted the Molly. Like I would go on the field and accept it. Because I wanted to fit in as a child. Well, what child doesn't want to fit in?
Yeah.
Right? So.
Rita, yeah?
Yes, you mentioned that your goal is to use pottery as a tool for liberation.
Yes.
Expand on that thought, please.
Sure. Well, when I was in grad school, I was studying the colonial period, right? And I wanted to look at it through the lens of a maker. And so I decided to focus on pottery traditions. And then I started to think about, okay, pottery was an object that the planters allowed the women to make, right? So think about it, even under bondage, we were able to go dig the clay, we were able to make pots, we were able to fire the pots as a collective. The pots were used for cooking, right, to nourish us. It served the food, it stored the food, and it was one of the items that they were allowed to sell on Sunday markets. So I was thinking, like, you know, when I had these conversations with my art professor at the time, my art historian professor, we were thinking about, wow, what if those women were able to buy their freedom from selling those pots on Sunday markets, right? We don't know for fact, but then I started to think, like, it could have been possible, right? So then I thought, wow, I'm looking at it as a tool for liberation. And that's how I started to, and then also when you're working in that material, you feel liberated. If everything around you is like, it doesn't matter, you're blocked out. Because something about clay and working with that material, because the possibilities are endless. You're working with this material that we all walk on, right? We're all experiencing it, and then you turn it into something that could be utilitarian or could be sculptural. And so that's creating possibility and freedom. And so that's why I think about it that way.
Yeah, you also have to think that just the agency that gives you in that limited time, when your agency in so many other ways is taken away, it would have had to have been just hugely impactful for your human dignity.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna stop there.
Okay.
Unless there's a burning question, and then, yeah, you're good? Because I feel like you also want time. We want time to meet each other. We always say at band, meet someone new. We have the smartest people in the town come to hang with us. So you're always gonna meet someone smart, interesting, doing cool things. You're gonna get time to hang with this amazing artist and author. And you're gonna get some time to take a copy of the book. I do want to acknowledge, if she'll come, because I've been trying to exit over here to the front row, our poet laureate for Toronto. Before you say a quick hello, I also wanted to acknowledge Rita Burke. You heard her voice.
Rita.
Those of you who know booksellers in this town, we know Burke's bookstores, and we know how important that bookstore was for community gathering. Last weekend we actually, and I know y'all thought you were special, but they opened the space. They were here for the last weekend with a publication, and Mr. Burke was here, so the couple for that bookstore were here, and he talked about how this reminded him of their early start for the bookstore, which, needless to say, almost brought me and Junior to tears. We're like, that's so cool. So thank you for coming, Rita, and for your community. You say hello?
Yeah, hello. I just want to say that I used to live upstairs, Spence,
Wow.
quite a number, some 40 odd years ago, and feel the vitality of this place, this area. My relatives used to come in from Kitchener, Waterloo, and even from as far as Ottawa, Buffalo.